The story of Liam and Eva began in a small, dim apartment that always smelled a little like old soup and worry. They were brother and sister, stuck in a life that felt like it was shrinking. The walls seemed to get closer every month, all because of a mountain of paper that sat on their kitchen table. Medical bills from their mother's long and brave fight with sickness. She was gone now, and all she had left behind was her love for them and a pile of debt that felt like a heavy chain around their ankles. Liam was the older brother, a man with strong hands from his work as a carpenter and a tired look in his eyes. He fixed things for a living, but he couldn't seem to fix their situation. Every paycheck he earned seemed to vanish before it even reached his bank account, swallowed by the endless reminders from collection agencies. He felt the weight of it all, the responsibility to provide and protect, and it was slowly crushing his spirit. Eva, his younger sister, was different. Where Liam was solid and quiet, she was all nervous energy and sharp eyes. She had a degree in history, which she joked was only useful for knowing exactly how bad things had been for other people in the past. She spent her days working a cash register, her mind buzzing with facts about dead kings and old wars while she scanned cans of soup and loaves of bread. She was the dreamer, always looking for a way out, a secret door in the flat landscape of their lives. Their one flicker of hope was a small trust fund from a grandfather they'd never met. It wasn't a life-changing amount, not enough to buy a house or start a business. It was just enough to be tempting, to whisper of possibilities. For years they had treated it as a sacred emergency fund, too scared to touch it. But as the debt grew, the fund started to look less like a safety net and more like a seed. The question was, where could they plant it? It was Eva who found the listing online. Late one night when she couldn't sleep, her computer screen cast a blue glow on her face in the dark apartment. "Liam," she whispered, her voice tight with a strange excitement. "You need to see this." On the screen was a picture of a house, or what was left of one. It was a big old mansion, but it looked sad and broken. Its windows were like blind eyes, some boarded up, others just empty holes. The paint was peeled away in long strips, and a tree branch had fallen onto part of the roof. The description called it a handyman's special and a historic fixer-upper with unique provenance. It was being sold in a quick auction, and the starting bid was shockingly low. It was low for a reason, but it was the last line that made Eva's heart beat faster. Previous ownership linked to a trust associated with President John F. Kennedy. "Kennedy?" Liam said, leaning over her shoulder. "That can't be real. It's probably a scam." "That's what everyone else will think," Eva said, her historian's mind already racing. "But look, it's all legal. It's just forgotten." She dug deeper. The story, as much as there was one, suggested the house was built in the late 1950s. It was never a main home. The whispers in the few old news articles she found called it a retreat, a private getaway. Maybe for a friend, maybe for something more discreet. It was never important enough for the history books, and after the president's tragic death, it was just abandoned. The world moved on, and the house was left to its slow decay. To Liam, it looked like a nightmare. It would need a new roof, new plumbing, new wiring, new everything. It was a money pit. But to Eva, it was a secret, a piece of a puzzle, a story waiting to be found. "This is it," she said, turning to her brother. "This is our chance. We use the trust fund to buy it. We'll have a roof over our heads, a leaky one, but a roof. And it's an asset. A real piece of property. An asset that's falling down," Liam argued. "We could pour all our money into that place and have nothing to show for it but a bigger pile of debt. Or," Eva said, her eyes shining, "we could be the ones who saved a little piece of history." "What if there's something there, Liam? What if?" The what if was the most dangerous question in the world. They argued for days. They sat at that kitchen table, the bills spread out between them, and they went in circles. Fear against hope. Practicality against a dream. In the end, it was the crushing weight of the present that made the risk of the past seem worth taking. Their current life was a dead end. This at least was a path, even if it was overgrown with thorns. They went to the auction, their hearts in their throats. It was held in a dusty courthouse room with only a handful of people. There was one other bidder, a man in a suit who looked like he wanted the land to build something new. He seemed bored. When the auctioneer called out the starting bid, Liam, his hand trembling slightly, raised his paddle. The man in the suit made one counteroffer. Eva squeezed Liam's arm. He raised the paddle again. The man in the suit shrugged and walked away, Just like that, with the bang of a gavel, Liam and Eva Rossi were the owners of a deserted mansion that once, a long time ago, had a connection to a president. The first time they stood in front of it, the reality was even harsher than the photos. The air was cold and damp. The front door groaned like a dying animal when they pushed it open. The inside was a mess of fallen plaster, mouse droppings, and a profound, deep silence that had been gathering for decades. For the first few weeks, it was just hard, dirty work. They wore masks and old clothes. Liam attacked the most urgent problems, patching the worst of the roof leaks with a heavy tarp and then with new shingles. He ripped out soggy, rotten wall panels. His muscles ached every night. Eva became the cleanup crew, sweeping, hauling, and clearing. The glamour of history was gone, replaced by the blisters on her hands. But slowly, as they cleaned, the house began to whisper to her. She found small things: a single, elegant, high-heeled shoe under a floorboard, covered in dust, a faded map of Cuba tucked inside a broken history book, a corkboard with a few brittle yellowed newspaper clippings about the space race. These weren't treasures you could sell, but to Eva, they were clues. They were proof that real people had lived real moments here, moments that were tied to the big, sweeping history she had only read about. She would sit on the floor of a dusty room, holding that old map, and try to imagine the people who had stood here. What were they thinking? What were they feeling? She felt a strange connection across the years, a thread stretching from their own struggle to the secrets this house was keeping. Liam saw it too, but differently. He saw the craftsmanship in the old woodwork, the quality of the bones of the house beneath the neglect. Someone built this to last, he'd say, running a hand over a solid oak beam. They cared about this place once. They were exhausted, poor, and living in a construction site. But for the first time in years, they were working towards something together. They had a purpose. They were no longer just trying to keep their heads above water. They were building a new shore, even if it was a shaky and uncertain one. They had no idea that the house's biggest secret, the one that would change everything, was still hidden, waiting patiently in the dark. Silent basement for one of them to swing a hammer in just the right spot. The initial shock of owning the mansion slowly wore off, replaced by the gritty, everyday reality of living inside a ruin. The brother and sister fell into a rhythm, a routine of hard work and small discoveries. Their world shrank to the borders of their overgrown property, filled with the sounds of hammers, saws, and their own tired voices. The brother, Liam, was in a constant battle with the structure itself. His days were a cycle of assessment and repair. He learned the language of the old house, the different creaks in the floorboards, the way the wind whistled through a specific crack in the attic, the stubborn drip, drip, drip from a corner of the kitchen ceiling, even after he was sure he'd fixed the leak outside. His hands, already rough from his trade, became nicked and calloused, a map of his efforts. He'd come inside at the end of the day, covered in a fine layer of plaster dust and sweat. His shoulders slumped with a fatigue that was as much mental as it was physical. He wasn't just fixing a house. He was trying to build a future from splinters and decay. His sister, Eva, took on the interior. While he fought the big problems, she waged a war against decades of neglect. She spent days sweeping up piles of dead leaves that had blown inside, scrubbing layers of grime from the few remaining windows, and hauling out broken furniture that was too far gone to save. The work was monotonous, but it gave her time to think and to look. She was the explorer of their small, dusty world. She started to notice things, little details that made the past feel less like a story and more like a ghost, sharing the space with them. In one of the smaller bedrooms, she found a child's wooden alphabet block tucked behind a radiator. Its red paint faded to a soft pink. It was a small, simple object, but it made her wonder. Whose little hands had played with it? Was it a visitor's child? Or did it hint at a deeper, more hidden story? In a desk drawer stuck to the bottom was a faded black and white photograph of a woman laughing, her head thrown back. She was beautiful, but no one they recognized. On the back, in elegant cursive, was written only Hyannisport 61. The date sent a shiver down Eva's spine. It was a place and time etched into history books. She didn't just throw these things away. She started a small collection on the mantelpiece in the main living room, the one room they had mostly cleared. The lonely high-heeled shoe, the map of Cuba, the photograph, the alphabet block. To her brother, it was just a pile of junk. To her, it was a museum of mysteries. She'd look at them in the evening, the single kerosene lamp they used casting long shadows, and try to piece together the lives that had briefly flickered within these walls. It's just clutter. Eva, her brother would say, sinking into their one salvaged armchair. We need to focus on making the place livable, not on collecting ghosts. They're not ghosts, she'd reply softly, wiping dust off the photograph. They're clues. This house has a story to tell. I can feel it. He'd just shake his head, too tired to argue. For him, the story was the leaking roof and the faulty wiring. The past was a luxury they couldn't afford. The basement was the last place either of them wanted to be. It was a dark, low-ceilinged space that smelled of wet earth and old rot. A single bare light bulb hung from a wire, casting a weak yellowish glow that made the shadows seem even deeper. They had avoided it, both feeling a strange, unspoken dread about what might be down there. But the time came when they couldn't avoid it any longer. The house's main electrical panel was in the basement, and Liam needed to see if any of the old wiring could be salvaged before they paid for a costly new connection from the street. They went down together, their footsteps loud on the wooden stairs. The air was cold and still. The beam from their flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing stacks of forgotten things, a broken wooden crate, a pile of empty mason jars, an old, rusted water heater that had given up long ago. Liam went straight to the electrical panel, his expression grim as he opened it. Eva, meanwhile, let her flashlight drift around the room. The walls were made of rough fieldstone and concrete. In one corner, a set of old wooden shelves had partially collapsed, spilling their contents onto the dirt floor. This is a total loss, Liam muttered, peering into the tangle of old wires in the panel. We're going to have to start from scratch. It's going to cost a fortune. Eva wasn't listening. Her light was fixed on the wall behind the collapsed shelves. The rest of the wall was rough, uneven stone, but one section looked different. It was smoother. Liam, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Look at this. He sighed, turning away from the electrical panel. What is it? This part of the wall. It doesn't match. He came over, shining his own light where she pointed. She was right. While the rest of the basement wall was made of large, irregular stones, this section was a perfect rectangle of smooth gray concrete, about the size of a small door. It was cleverly done, meant to be overlooked, but the collapse of the shelves had exposed its edges. Probably just a repair, Liam said, but he didn't sound convinced. He reached out and knocked on the concrete. It made a solid, dull thud. He knocked on the stone wall next to it. The sound was different. He knocked on the concrete again, harder this time. Thud. Thud. Then he moved his knuckles to the very center of the smooth rectangle and knocked once more. Clunk. It wasn't the sound of solid concrete. It was the sound of something hollow, something metal. A jolt of electricity far more powerful than anything in the old wiring passed between them. All the tiredness vanished from Liam's face, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. Ava's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Without a word, Liam started pulling away the rest of the collapsed shelves, his strength fueled by a sudden, burning curiosity. The wood splintered and groaned as he cleared the space, fully revealing the hidden rectangle. Now in the full glare of their flashlights, they could see the faint, almost invisible lines. It was a door, a seamless metal door, painted to look like concrete with a discreet, tarnished brass handle they hadn't noticed before. And just below the handle, almost hidden in the shadows, was a keyhole. But it wasn't a normal keyhole. It was an unusual, elongated shape with a distinctive, ornate design etched around it. They stood there side by side, breathing heavily in the dusty air. The silence of the basement was now a living thing, pressing in on them. The mundane worries of roofs and wiring were gone, swept away by a single pounding question. What in the world was behind this door, and how were they ever going to get it open? The discovery in the basement changed everything. The air in the old mansion, once just heavy with dust, now felt thick with possibility. The leaky roof and the peeling paint were suddenly forgotten. All that existed for the brother and sister was the smooth gray door and the strange, silent question of its lock. For the next 2 days, their world shrank to that small, damp corner of the basement. It became an obsession. The first thing they tried was force. Liam, with his carpenter's muscles, brought down a heavy sledgehammer. The impact when it hit the metal door was deafening, a loud, jarring clang that echoed in the confined space. It felt like hitting a safe. The door didn't even dent. It just shuddered. and a fine rust fell from its seams like old snow. He tried to pry the edges with a crowbar, but the door was set perfectly flush into the concrete and stone. There was no gap, no purchase for the metal claw. He strained until the veins stood out on his forehead, but it was useless. The door wouldn't budge. It's no use, he finally said, dropping the crowbar with a clatter. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a dusty forearm. This isn't a normal door. It's a vault. We're not getting through this without the right key. Eva, who had been watching with a mixture of hope and fear, felt a sinking feeling. A key? A key that could be anywhere. It could be lost in the woods outside, thrown away decades ago, or sitting in a junk drawer in a stranger's house 1,000 miles away. The thought was crushing. They tried to think logically. Where would someone hide a key? They tapped every stone in the basement walls, searching for a hollow spot. They pulled up the rotten floorboards near the door, finding only dirt and worms. They ran their hands over every beam and joist overhead, their fingers getting covered in grime and cobwebs. Nothing. Frustration began to set in. The initial excitement was turning into a maddening itch they couldn't scratch. They found themselves snapping at each other over small things. Who had moved a flashlight? What to have for dinner? The mystery of the door was a wall between them and the rest of their lives. On the third morning, Eva was up in the main living room, feeling defeated. She absent-mindedly picked up the small collection of treasures from the mantelpiece. The laughing woman in the photograph, the faded map, the lonely shoe. She held the old ornate letter opener they had found weeks ago in a desk upstairs. It was heavy and cool in her hand, made of tarnished brass. The handle was intricately carved and the blade was dull, never meant for opening envelopes. At the time, she thought it was just a fancy souvenir. She was turning it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, when her thumb traced the unique shape of the handle. It was long and slightly curved, with a distinctive pattern of grooves. A thought, quiet and tentative at first, began to form in her mind. It was a silly thought, really. But the more she looked at it, the less it looked like a letter opener, and the more it looked like something else. Her heart started to beat a little faster. She walked over to the window, holding the object up to the gray morning light. The shape of the handle was unusual. It wasn't just decorative. It was specific. Without a word, she turned and walked quickly toward the basement stairs. "Where are you going?" her brother called from the kitchen, where he was sketching wiring diagrams with a grim expression. She didn't answer. Her footsteps were quick on the wooden steps. She went straight to the door, her breath catching in her throat. She knelt down in front of the keyhole, the cold of the concrete seeping through her jeans. She held the brass object next to the keyhole. The shape of the handle was a perfect mirror image of the keyhole's outline. A soft gasp escaped her lips. It wasn't a letter opener. It was the key. Her hands trembled as she brought it closer. This was it. This was the moment. She reversed her grip so the pointed blade was pointing away from her. It wasn't a blade at all, she realized now. It was the key's shaft. Slowly, carefully, she inserted the end of the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting for her. It was a perfect fit. She pushed it all the way in until she heard a faint, satisfying click from deep within the mechanism. For a long second, she just knelt there, her hand on the cold brass, not daring to move. The silence in the basement was absolute. Then she took a deep breath and turned the key. The sound was not loud, but it was profound in the stillness, a heavy, solid thunk of a bolt sliding back, a sound that hadn't been heard in over 50 years. She pulled the key out and stood up, her legs feeling weak. She looked at the door, then back toward the stairs. She needed her brother. She couldn't face whatever was behind this door alone. "Liam," she called out, her voice shaky but loud. "Liam, come down here now." She heard his chair scrape back in the kitchen above, then his heavy, hurried footsteps on the stairs. He appeared at the bottom, his face a mask of concern. "What is it?" "What's wrong?" She just pointed at the door, her hand still trembling. It worked. His eyes widened. He saw the key in her hand and he understood. The grim determination from the days of trying to break it down was gone, replaced by a look of pure awe. He walked over and stood beside her. Together they stared at the seamless gray surface. He was the one who reached out. He wrapped his fingers around the cold, tarnished brass of the handle. He took a deep breath, glanced at his sister, and pulled. The door didn't creak or groan. It opened with a slow, heavy, and incredibly smooth motion, as if it were perfectly balanced. A sigh of old, still air whispered out from the darkness within. It didn't smell like the damp basement. It smelled dry and cold and strangely sterile. They both leaned forward, shining their flashlights into the opening. The room was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet. But it was unlike anything else in the house. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of smooth, sealed metal. The air was perfectly still and dust-free. It was a time capsule, untouched by the decay that had consumed the rest of the mansion. And it was not empty. Neatly arranged on metal shelves were rows of dark green, ledger-style notebooks, their covers worn at the edges. Next to them were stacks of cardboard file boxes. And on the bottom shelf, a dozen or so small, metal canisters, the kind used for old film reels. Liam took a step inside, his flashlight beam dancing over the shelves. He reached out and carefully picked up one of the notebooks. It was heavier than it looked. He opened it. The page was filled with handwriting. It was a strong, confident, and slightly messy script, written in dark blue ink. He read the first line at the top of the page. October 16th. The weight is immense. The photos from the U-2 flight confirm it. Khrushchev has been lying to the world. Liam's face went pale. He looked up at his sister, his eyes wide with a confusion that was quickly turning into disbelief. He didn't need to be a history expert like her to recognize the significance of those words. He slowly handed her the open journal. Eva took it, her own flashlight beam illuminating the page. Her eyes scanned the words once, then twice. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that date. She knew what the photos meant. This was from the Cuban Missile Crisis. This wasn't a history book. This was a private diary. She looked up from the page, her gaze sweeping over the rows of similar notebooks, the files, the film canisters. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was a secret history. A president's most private thoughts, his fears, his unvarnished truth, were all sitting here on these shelves in this cold, silent room. They weren't just poor siblings who had bought a broken-down house anymore. They were the first people in over half a century to lay eyes on a secret that could change everything. And they had absolutely no idea what to do next. For a long time, they didn't speak. They just stood in the doorway of the small, cold room, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The silence felt heavier than any they had ever known, filled now with the ghost of the words they had just read. The brother finally broke the spell, his voice a dry whisper. "We need to close the door." He pulled it shut, the heavy thunk of the bolt sliding back into place sounding like a final judgment. The smooth gray wall looked innocent again, but they knew the truth that lay behind it. They climbed the basement stairs slowly, their legs feeling like lead. The familiar kitchen with its cracked counter and their cheap kettle looked alien and strange. Their ordinary world had just been ripped away. They sat at their rickety kitchen table, the single kerosene lamp between them casting dancing shadows on their serious faces. The excitement was gone, completely replaced by a cold, creeping fear. What is all that?" the brother asked, though he already knew the answer was bigger than any words they had. "It's his," the sister whispered, her eyes wide. "It's his private thoughts, his diaries, those files, those film canisters. It's everything they never put in the history books. The weight of it settled on them, a physical pressure on their shoulders. They weren't treasure hunters who had found gold coins. They were two ordinary people holding a lit match next to a mountain of dynamite. They both understood, without having to say it, that this was dangerous. This was the kind of secret that powerful people had probably wanted to stay hidden forever. "We can't tell anyone," the brother said, his voice firm with a new kind of protectiveness. "Not a soul. Not until we understand what we have." For the next week, their lives took on a strange, secret rhythm. During the day, they would go through the motions of working on the house. Liam would hammer nails into the new roof shingles, the loud bangs echoing in the quiet valley. Eva would sweep and clean, her movements automatic. They were acting, pretending to be the simple renovators they were supposed to be. But at night, after the sun went down, they would become different people. They would sneak down to the basement, unlock the hidden door, and bring up a single notebook or one small file box. They felt like thieves in their own home, stealing glances at a past that wasn't theirs to see. They set up a small table in the living room, the one with the solid floor, and they would read. They read by the light of the kerosene lamp, their heads close together, their voices hushed. The words in the journals were breathtaking. They weren't the polished speeches of a president. They were raw and human, He wrote about his fears, his frustrations with the generals who seemed so eager for war, his private hopes for peace. Eva read passages aloud, her voice soft and full of wonder. "Listen to this," she'd say. "Met with the Joint Chiefs today. Their certainty is terrifying. They speak of acceptable losses as if they are numbers on a chart, not fathers and sons. I must find another way." The brother, who was more practical, focused on the file boxes. They were filled with typed memos, carbon copies of secret communications, and candid photographs. There were pictures of the president looking tired and strained in private meetings, maps with handwritten notes in the margins, and transcripts of tense phone calls. It was overwhelming. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose of history. Then one night the sister found it. It was in a journal marked with the final year. The entries grew darker, more anxious. He wrote about feeling watched, about his phone lines feeling insecure, about a growing sense that some forces within his own government were working against his efforts for peace. And then they found the file. It was a thin, plain folder, tucked between two thicker ones. It was marked only with a city and a date. The city was Dallas. The date was November 22nd, 1963. The sister's hands shook so badly she could barely open it. Inside, there was no long report, just a single typewritten memo. It was from a low-level intelligence agent, a warning sent to a security detail. The memo spoke of a climate of permissiveness in the city and vague concerns about unverified threats from internal elements. It suggested that the official security plan was insufficient, that there were gaps, blind spots. It wasn't a smoking gun. It didn't name a killer or detail a conspiracy, but it was a chilling confirmation of the fear they had just read in the journal. It was a president's private fear, echoed by a forgotten whisper from the shadows, both pointing to the same terrible day. The sister looked up from the paper, her face pale. Her eyes met her brother's across the table. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible. "This is why this room was hidden. This is the secret." The brother leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The initial fear was now a cold knot in his stomach. What do we do with this, Ava? What can we possibly do? If they went public in a loud way on the internet or to a sensational news show, they would be called crazy. They would be attacked. They might even be in danger from people who wanted this truth to stay buried. Their lives could be torn apart. But if they did nothing, if they just closed the door and walked away, they would be burying the truth all over again. They would be complicit in the silence. They spent the rest of the night talking in hushed, urgent tones. They couldn't keep it. They couldn't destroy it. They had to give it to someone who could protect it, someone with the authority and the integrity to handle it responsibly. But who? The brother asked, exhausted. Who can we trust with something this big? The sister was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then she remembered a name from her history studies. An older woman, a former national archivist. She was retired now, but she was famous in academic circles for her fierce dedication to the truth and her impeccable reputation. She had spent her life preserving history, not twisting it. Her, the sister said finally. We have to try and find her. She would know what to do. It was a fragile thread of hope, but it was all they had. They were two small people, holding a secret that had altered their own history. And now they had to find a way to give it safely to the world. The deserted mansion no longer felt like a project. It felt like a fortress, and they were its scared, determined guardians. The decision was made, but now came the hardest part, waiting and planning. The brother and sister felt like they were living inside a bubble of glass, terrified that a single wrong move would cause it to shatter. The secret in the basement was a constant hum in the back of their minds, no matter what they were doing. The sister, Eva, spent days in the local library, using their public computer to carefully research the retired archivist. She was a woman named Dr. Aris, and everything Eva found confirmed her first impression. Dr. Aris was described as a fierce guardian of historical truth, a woman who had clashed with politicians over the sealing of documents. She was now in her 70s, living a quiet life a few hours' drive away. She was their best and only hope. Writing the email to her was one of the most difficult things Eva had ever done. She couldn't say much. She used a new anonymous email account and wrote, vaguely about being the new owners of the Virginia property, and having discovered private papers of a highly sensitive, historical nature that they believed required her expert guidance. She held her breath and clicked send. For 3 agonizing days there was no reply. They barely slept. Every creak of the old house made them jump. They started to imagine strange cars on their long dirt driveway. The brother Liam even started keeping a heavy wrench near the front door just in case. Then on the fourth morning, a reply appeared in the anonymous inbox. It was short and cautious. Dr. Eris agreed to meet them, but on her terms. She named a small, quiet cafe in a town halfway between their home and hers. She would be wearing a blue scarf. She would come alone, and she expected them to do the same. The meeting day felt like walking a tightrope. They drove in silence, the brothers' knuckles white on the steering wheel. The cafe was a quiet, ordinary place, smelling of coffee and baked goods. And there, in a corner booth, sat an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a blue scarf neatly folded on the table beside her. They introduced themselves with first names only. Their hands were shaking. Dr. Eris listened, her expression giving nothing away, as Ava, speaking in a low, rushed whisper, told her everything. She told her about the purchase, the hidden door, the key, and what they had found inside. She didn't go into the explosive details about Dallas, but she mentioned the dates and the nature of the journals. When Eva finished, the old woman was silent for a long time, just studying their faces. She seemed to be weighing their honesty, their fear. "May I see a sample?" she finally asked, her voice calm and clear. The brother nodded nervously. From inside his jacket, he carefully pulled out a single, clear plastic sleeve. Inside it was a photocopied page from one of the less sensitive journals, one detailing the president's thoughts on the space race. They had left the originals safely hidden, too scared to move them. Dr. Eris put on a pair of reading glasses. She studied the photocopy for several minutes, her face a mask of concentration. She looked at the handwriting, the phrasing, the paper quality visible in the copy. When she looked up, her eyes were different. The caution was still there, but it was now mixed with a profound, grave understanding. "My God," she said softly. "It's real, isn't it?" They both just nodded. A wave of relief so powerful it made them dizzy, washing over them. Someone believed them. Dr. Eris took charge. She explained the process. They would not go to the media. They would not post anything online. This was a matter for historical institutions. She would act as their intermediary. She knew the directors of the Presidential Library and a few major universities. She would contact them on her secure line and arrange for a quiet professional authentication team to come to the house. The next week was a blur. A small unmarked van arrived at the mansion. A team of 3 serious-faced experts, a historian, an archivist, and a documents specialist, came inside. Dr. Eris was with them. The brother and sister led them to the basement, unlocked the door, and held their breath. The professionals worked in silent, reverent awe. They wore white gloves. They used special lights and magnifying glasses. They gently examined the journals, the files, the film canisters. The brother and sister watched from the doorway, feeling like they were witnessing a miracle. After several hours, the lead historian turned to them. His face was pale, his voice filled with emotion. "This is beyond significant," he said. "This is the most important historical discovery in decades. You have done a great service by bringing this to light in such a responsible way." The documents were carefully, painstakingly packed into special climate-controlled cases and taken away to a secure, undisclosed location for full preservation and study. The news did not break with a sensational bang. It began as a quiet, respected headline in a major newspaper. Private journals of President Kennedy discovered, set to rewrite key chapters of Cold War history. The story, guided by Dr. Eris, focused on the historical value, not the conspiracy. It spoke of his private struggles for peace, his diplomatic efforts, and his human fears. The more troubling findings about Dallas were not ignored, but they were presented to academic and federal review boards first, to be studied with the seriousness they deserved. The world was stunned. Historians scrambled. News channels buzzed with experts. But for the brother and sister, life became strangely quiet. Reporters did find their way to the old mansion, but Dr. Eris had prepared them. They gave no interviews. They said simply that they were just the caretakers who had been lucky, or perhaps chosen, to find the truth, and that their only wish was for it to be studied properly, because they had followed the right path. Through a person of integrity, they were offered a small, discreet finder's fee from the historical foundation that took possession of the papers. It was enough. It was more than enough. It paid off their mother's medical debt completely. It left them with a cushion to finally fix the house properly, not out of desperation, but with care. One evening, months later, they sat on their now solid front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. The house around them was no longer a decaying secret keeper, but a comfortable home. The weight was gone. You know, the brother said, breaking the comfortable silence. We bought this place because we had nothing left to lose. The sister smiled, a real peaceful smile that reached her eyes. And we found something that wasn't meant to be lost, she replied. We didn't just find history, Liam, we found our way out. They had not become famous. They had not become rich beyond their dreams, but they had become free. The deserted mansion had given them the greatest treasure possible, a chance to leave the past behind, both their own and the one hidden in the basement, and to finally, peacefully, start their future.